Good afternoon. Welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Will Friedman, President and CEO of the Cleveland-Cuyahoga County Port Authority, and I'm very excited to be here today for what we hope will be an annual event, the State of the Great Lakes. We at the Port Authority are focused on improving the region's vitality through our maritime services and our economic development and sustainable infrastructure programs, which are funded in part from a levy that will be back on the county ballot this November. Today we are assembled about 1 mile from the shores of Lake Erie and the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway system. These 5 lakes are an incredible natural asset and central to our economic prosperity and quality of life. The lakes are the planet's largest source of fresh water, roughly 20% of the world's supply, and more than 90% of North America's supply. That's enough to cover the entire continent in 5 feet of water. And though we're doing much better taking care of it than we used to, we could certainly be doing more. In recent years, we have seen more policies supporting the Great Lakes. We've seen an international compact to protect the lakes and major federal investment in restoration, some of which has made it to our shores here in Cleveland. Today, though, we are delighted to welcome the Honorable Tom Barrett, Mayor of Milwaukee, to share with us the state of the Great Lakes. Mayor Barrett is the immediate past president of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. Last summer, Mayor Barrett, along with the mayors of 96 cities from the United States and Canada, made a declaration of water sustainability to protect the lakes from threats to water quality, including stormwater and agricultural runoff, algal blooms, dead zones, and failing infrastructure. Mayor Barrett was elected to office in Milwaukee in 2004 and has worked with the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District to tackle some of these challenges. We're looking forward to hearing how that's going and about efforts from across the region. Ladies and gentlemen, in our broadcast audience, please welcome the Honorable Tom Barrett.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It is a real honor for me to be here in Cleveland. I came in last night and I spent several hours walking around downtown, and I was very impressed. It reminds me a lot of Milwaukee. It looks like you're fighting back, so congratulations. I'm very, very, very happy to see that. I knew I would get a warm welcome in Cleveland, but you didn't have to go to the extremes that you have to have me come here. And I'm honored, obviously, to be at this distinguished club. I was talking to a friend of mine many years ago, because I have followed this club for years, and he said, they won't let you talk there in 100 years. And then once we got to your 100-year anniversary, I thought, well, maybe I'll get a shot someday now. That we got through that first 100 years, I'm happy to be able to be here in your second 100 years. I want to start out, and you don't have to have a show of hands here, but I'm going to ask you to help me work through some personal problems that I have, if you'll help me with this. And I'm on somewhat of a mission, and you'll get a sense of my mission very quickly here. Again, I don't need a show of hands, but let me ask this question. How many people in here like rust? Okay, there's one person. How many people, now I will ask for a show of hands, and maybe I'm asking on the wrong day because it is so warm. How many people like the sun? We all like the sun. Well, if you think about the Great Lakes region, if you think about the Rust Belt, I am here in part to ask you to never use the phrase Rust Belt again. All right? And that is not a slight on Cleveland's history. It's not a slight on Ohio's history. It's not a slight on Milwaukee's industry or Wisconsin's industry or any other industries in the Midwest. But I think it's long past time that we allow others to define who we are. Again, we have a rich manufacturing history here in Ohio and Cleveland, as we do in Wisconsin. And we're proud of that, and we still have some of it, but we all know our economies have changed. And we are no longer the Rust Belt. And so I talk to people from the East Coast, I talk to people from the West Coast. I think it's high time that we start yelling from the rooftops about America's Fresh Coast. Because that's who we are. That is who we are. We are America's fresh coast. It defines our history, it defines our economy, it defines our fun, and it's honest. It's one of those advertising maxims, if you will, that if you're telling the truth, it's the best thing. And I think as we reposition ourselves as a region, and a lot of this is about this region, both in the United States and Canada, that we lead with our long suit. And if you look at it from a historic context, it makes sense. The Native Americans came here, obviously first, and then the Europeans came here. They came here because of the water. And I want to talk about that for a little bit because, again, you're helping me work through some of my psychological issues. The first one was getting rid of the Rust Belt. The second one is a problem that you would have if you are from Wisconsin. And the problem I have is a little boy in Wisconsin, I would look at that map of Wisconsin. I don't have a map here, but there's something that jumps out of you when you look at that map of Wisconsin. And what jumps out of you is, why is that Upper Peninsula of Michigan part of Michigan and not part of Wisconsin? It just used to bug me. It was sort of my manifest destiny. How do we get that as part of Wisconsin? Well, finally, when I did the history on it, you're the problem. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't. Well, you should know this. And it's not Cleveland. I won't blame Cleveland for it. It's Toledo. It's the Toledo War. If you are familiar with the Toledo War, 1835, 1836, Ohio was already a state. Michigan was a territory. And Michigan wanted Toledo. And Ohio wanted Toledo. And they were going back and forth, and Ohio actually slowed up Michigan's entry into the United States because of this battle over Toledo. Well, finally, in 1836, Congress decided that the Toledo Strip, as it is called, would be part of Ohio. And in exchange, to make Michigan happy, they gave them the Upper Peninsula. That's what happened. That's what happened. Wisconsin wasn't a state yet, and so we got the short end of that deal. And they were thinking, oh, Upper Peninsula, who cares about that? Well, obviously then, with all the iron ore that they were able to find and the timber, that Michigan actually, for a long time, got the better end of that trade. But I raise that because, and I want to keep on this because of the rich history of the City Club here, but the history of the Great Lakes are important. They're important because the way I describe it, they were our original interstate highway system. Not a surprise, before the railroads. So many of the goods were shipped by ship that it was very, very important to have access to the Great Lakes. And if you look, again, going back to when the Northwest Territories were formed, and you start at the southern tip of Lake Michigan, and you run a line east. That was to be the line between the upper states and the lower states. And again, they made that very small. If you look at a map, you'll see if you look at the bottom of Lake Michigan and run a line straight to the east, that's supposed to be a straight line, east and west from there. But it changed in three different reasons, and it ties all into the Great Lakes. The first one was, of course, the Toledo Strip. So that just moved it just a little bit so that Toledo would be part of Ohio, and then it came down. So that took care of the Ohio-Michigan problem and had Toledo stay part of Ohio. Well, then you get to Indiana, and Indiana said, well, if you keep it at the very bottom of Lake Michigan, we have no access to Lake Michigan. We don't have we don't have an entry ramp or an exit ramp to the Great Lakes. So they moved it 10 miles. So the next time you look at a map of the United States, look very carefully because it's almost hard to see. But the two lines that you assume might be a continuous line, one actually runs a little bit north, the other one runs east-west straight, but they're both basically 10 miles up. Well, then you get to Illinois, and frankly, and I don't know if this is good or bad for a Wisconsinite, at one point, because the territory's boundaries changed back and forth, Chicago was part of the Wisconsin territory. And so for a Packer fan, thinking the Bears, the Packers, I don't know how I'd feel about that. But what happened there was you had the canals in northern Illinois, and the issue, this is all sort of the time when slavery was still very much an issue. The issue was, would the goods and services be shipped to the Mississippi River and then head south, or would they go through the Great Lakes? And the decision was made by Congress at the urging of Illinois that border got moved 60 miles north. So again, take a look at a map sometime and you'll see the way it cuts across there. And this was all about the Great Lakes. So the history of this region of the country, not surprisingly, is just so tied up with the Great Lakes because it was so important to our economies. And even if you go a little bit further west for Minnesota, Minnesota originally had no access to the Great Lakes because the western boundary actually followed the Mississippi River. So what they did then is they took basically a line from the western edge of Lake Superior and just dropped it straight down, and that's what allowed Minnesota to have access to the Great Lakes. Because all of us wanted to have access for this, to this great natural resource. And as was said, this is the place where 36 million people get our drinking water. And at a time when tragically there are 1 billion people on this planet who don't have an adequate water supply for drinking and 2 billion people who don't have it for sanitary purposes, we are incredibly lucky to have this natural asset just a mile away from where we are right now. And I think that is the strength of our future, that this is what is going to allow us to prosper, and for cities like Cleveland and Milwaukee, is what's going to allow us to have a new renaissance. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes as to why I think this is important. A lot of this is about the environment, but a lot of it is about the human environment as well. And where people migrate to and why they migrate to the places, and just how important it is from an economic standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, because it clearly is something that we all have to be very concerned about. So again, I've gotten my psychological issues out of the way. We know that, but now it's time to sort of analyze where we are, what our challenges are, and where we can go from here. One of the things that I got involved in as a mayor of the city of Milwaukee is the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River Initiative. And this is a group of now 106 mayors. It's actually been growing. 2/3 of them are from the Canadian side, and 1/3 of them are from the U.S. side. We represent, in essence, 16 million people who live in these cities. And the organization is 10 years old. And it was formed in order to have mayors be part of the conversation and part of the solution and problem solving. And the reason that we have felt that that's important is because, and I've served in state government and federal government and local government, and I can tell you, and I've had great respect for each level of government, the least ideological level of government is local government, just by necessity. The way I describe it is people don't care whether their garbage is picked up by a Democrat or Republican. They just want their garbage picked up. They don't care whether their snow is plowed by a liberal or a conservative. You just better get their snow plowed. And so it's all about getting things done. And so what we try to do is we try to take a very pragmatic approach to the issues that the Great Lakes face. And we felt, and I feel very strongly, that the more voices that can come together, the better you can act and get the results that you want to have. And we focus on 3 different areas: on water quantity, on water quality, and on waterfront access, in essence. Because we think those are all important for cities. And so, for example, the quantity issue is we monitor the lake levels, and we had historic low levels in Lake Michigan and Lake Huron earlier this year. And so for those who say there's no climate change ramifications, I asked them to take a look at that. The water levels have come back. Obviously, you've had issues here with Lake Erie, with the algal blooms and things like that. You also have a lot of fish, which I'm jealous of. It seems that 95% of the fish are in Lake Erie for some reason, so congratulations on that. But that is something that we want to be part of the solution if those decisions are being made either in Ottawa or in Washington. And we feel very strongly that in order for us to be part of that conversation, we have to be ready to roll up our sleeves. So when you think of some of the issues that the lakes have faced in the recent past, like the ballast water discharges issue, the need to have, from my perspective, the need to have the same level of scrutiny in all the states. In other words, we cannot allow the ports to have different competitive advantages with one port having one level and another port having another level. That to me is counterproductive to what we were trying to accomplish. The invasive species issues, a hot issue when you look at what's going on in Chicago right now, and the need potentially to reverse the river, to actually reverse the flow of the Chicago River into the Illinois River, which will be a billion dollar undertaking to do because of the decisions that were made many years to reverse that in the first place. But that is what we're active in. We're active in issues dealing with diversions. And in our state, and my prediction is Ohio is coming next, is going to be the issue of diversions from the Great Lakes. And let me just take a minute to talk about that from the perspective that I have in my neck of the woods, because again, I think it's coming your way as well. The Great Lakes Compact was signed by President Bush back in 2008 after it was ratified by Congress. A very bipartisan agreement dealing with diversions of water from the Great Lakes Basin. Again, from Milwaukee's perspective, we've long felt that it's all right to have water taken out of the lake as long as the containers are smaller than 16 ounces and the water's fermented at the time. We like that. We like that in Milwaukee when people buy Milwaukee beer. But in terms of large-scale diversions, that's another issue altogether. And we know in the West, the Southwest in particular, there are water issues. We know that there are communities that would love to get their hands on Great Lakes water. We know in the Southeast there are water issues, lawsuits between different states over which state a specific lake or river would lie in. And so in a painstaking process, the 8 states came together and the 2 Canadian provinces of Ontario and Quebec and put together this historic water compact agreement. But now we have the first test in terms of a diversion request, and it comes from my backyard. Ironically, it comes from a community that is roughly 20 miles from Lake Michigan, a city by the name of Waukesha, which makes the case, and I think makes it in a pretty straightforward way, that it has a radium issue, that the EPA has ordered it to have a different water supply, in essence, or a plan in place by 2018. And so they've come with a request to have water. And again, the irony is it's basically closely to spitting distance to Lake Michigan, as opposed to the Mississippi River, where it's going to have to, if it doesn't get the diversion, continue to get its water. But the whole issue, as I see it, is going to be how large of an area is served, and what is the return to the lake? Because if you think of the eco cycle, the real test is, will the water be returned to the lake after it's cleaned? Will the water come back? But the compact itself also says that there has to be a need for potable drinking water. In other words, you have to not have the water. And what's happening in Wisconsin, and it's my understanding Ohio is the same way, there's a concept of a water service area, which is distinct, and this might be getting into the weeds too much, distinct from a political community. In other words, it's not a city, town, or a village. It's a water service area that may be drawn up by the state natural resources departments. That is not a phrase that's contained within the compact. And so the battle is going to be how large an area. If you have a discrete area where there is a real need, the water can get returned, that's one issue. If it's a larger area, what happens? And again, many of the states do not have this water service area, but several of them do. So that clearly is going to be one of the issues that I think is going to come to the forefront in the near future. Why is that important? It's important for obvious reasons, that you look at this great resource that we have to be the stewards of this moving to the future. It's important for us to be stewards of this moving towards the future. And so whether it's invasive species, whether it's water diversions, the Great Lakes mayors and St. Lawrence mayors feel very strongly that we can be an active voice in this. And I'm proud to be part of this organization. We frankly would love more Ohio mayors to be part of it as well, because we think the more numbers we have, the better we can act together. And the reason is the economy. If you think of the economy of this region, again, the 8 Great Lakes states and the 2 Canadian provinces, the economy itself is $7 billion just for the lakes themselves in terms of the fishing and recreational. So it's a lot right there. It's a $5 trillion economy. If you look at the whole economy, it puts us behind the US, Japan, and China. So we are an economic giant, and it's important for us to try to speak with one voice. And I will tell you, I served in Congress for 10 years before I became mayor of Milwaukee. And one of the things that impressed me most when I was in Congress was how the Florida delegation came together and was able to get dollars to save the Everglades. I'm glad they did, but it was not a partisan issue. They came together and they were able, because they spoke with a unified voice, to get the resources. We've had some success in Congress surrounding the Great Lakes, but I think we could be even more successful if it were a higher priority for members of the House and members of the Senate to all speak with one voice from this region. And we all have different levels of how important it is, but I think here in Northern Ohio, certainly it is something that is important. Why do I feel it's so important? And I want to tell you a quick story here. This was 6 or 7 years ago. I had a representative from the British consulate come to visit me in my office. And he said he wanted to come to Milwaukee, and the exact same conversation could have taken place in Cleveland. He said he wanted to come to Milwaukee because he wanted to see how a city that had a rich manufacturing history was making the transition from a predominant manufacturing economy to one that still had manufacturing, but was branching out into other areas. Again, very similar to Cleveland. And he said people think of England and they think of London. And London is probably more comparable to a New York or a Chicago or Los Angeles. But a lot of the communities in England, Manchester or Birmingham or Liverpool, probably have more in common with a Milwaukee or with a Cleveland for that matter. And so we talked about it, and I thought, I can't resist the opportunity to turn the tables on it. And I said, well, what are you finding is the common denominator for those communities in England that are making this successful transition? And he didn't even wait a second. He said 2 things: access to water and good higher education. And it was a eureka moment for me, because we have great universities in Milwaukee, just as you do here with Cleveland State and Case Western and the community college, and we have it in Milwaukee as well. And we've got this access to the Great Lakes. And what you're seeing here, my understanding, is very similar to what we're seeing. When I got out of school 30 years ago, nobody lived in downtown Milwaukee. And I bet 30 years ago, I don't know, I can't speak, but it was like, but now what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of young people and empty nesters that are coming because they want to be near the water, they want to be near the restaurants, they want to be near the nightlife, and it's changing. And I think it's going to change even more. And I think this puts Cleveland in a sweet spot, if you will, to do it. And we were just talking about this at lunch. If you think of the young people that are coming out of school right now, they're faced with record levels of student debt. So that means that their decision to buy a house will be delayed. They may not even be able to buy a car. And once you reach a critical mass of young people living in an area, who does it attract? More young people. And here you are in downtown Cleveland with all these older buildings that can be historically renovated for apartments for either young people or empty nesters or whomever for that matter. I think that the potential is there for cities, because of our access to the Great Lakes and the desire to be near the water, the access to other young people, the access to public transportation. I think that is what's going to help our cities have a renaissance because of this. And it's monopolizing, or it's not monopolizing, it's benefiting, sadly, from the challenges young people are going to have as they come out of school, because they're not going to be able to buy that house that they thought they could buy right off the bat. So I think taking the strengths of the water and the economy of the water, along with the challenges that people have, I think that this is a prime opportunities for all of us on the Great Lakes to really have this renaissance. We're going a step further in my neck of the woods, where we have formed a water council. And this was an interesting it was an interesting process for us, because it was not driven by the government. I know as a politician I'm supposed to come in here and say I had a 6-point program that led to the creation of the Water Council. I'm not even running here so I can tell you the truth. City Hall didn't drive this. Politicians didn't drive this. What happened was a small number of business people who were involved in water technology businesses said, why don't we get together and try to become the freshwater capital of the world? Now, whether this is going to happen or not, I don't know. But this is, as a mayor, you love seeing this. So you have companies, some of which you've heard of, some of which you haven't heard of, because we've got about 130, 150 water technology companies that have said, all right, let's create an accelerator building. So they put in a lot of money to get more water technology companies located there so that we can benefit from all the historic knowledge that we have. And I'm betting you've got the same thing here, where we can build, as I describe it, lead with our long suit. We can come back to what made our cities great and have them not be exactly like they were in 1925 or 45 or 65, but we still have the ability to have the changes and to move forward. So I'm very, very proud. What happened then ultimately is the government did get involved. The city's now a partner with our water council, but it is still driven by the private sector. They have a director. They try to attract water technology companies. They try to have other regions of the country that need water expertise come to us. And as much as I would like us to be the sole dominant player here, I think competition is good. And so I invite you to join the fray and get in, because I think it's good for all of us. The more we can capitalize on the strengths of our water and our region without hurting the resource, the better off we are. So I think that's a challenge as well. So I look at where we are as a region, and I'm talking about the whole Fresh Coast region, the whole upper Midwest region. And we know we've seen losses in population to the south. We know we've seen population losses to the west. And I think that was primarily because of the advent of air conditioning and central air conditioning, which made places that were too hot to live all of a sudden livable places. But that doesn't solve the water problem. And so as we look to the next 30, 40, 50 years, we have several obligations. One, we have to make sure that we are good stewards of these lakes. And it's actually not 20% of the world's fresh water supply. It's 20% of the world's surface water supply, just so that we have those numbers correct. That's what we're talking about. It's still a huge, huge number. And it has allowed us to have a blessed existence that I think many of us take for granted. But if we don't act as good stewards, shame on us. Because it is a situation where, and I don't know if any of you remember this, I certainly do, because I served with Bill Richardson, and he was the governor of New Mexico when he was running for president, and said, well, let's just start shipping that water from the Midwest when he was running. His campaign ended shortly after that. And it's because people, I think, in the Midwest recognize just how good we have it, and when they do, they're not going to squander it. So let me pause there. I know that I'm supposed to leave time for questions. I can talk for 8 hours if you want, but I'd rather have the exchange as well. So again, thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Mayor. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a Friday Forum featuring the Honorable Tom Barrett, Mayor of Milwaukee, and the immediate past chair for the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. We will return momentarily for our traditional City Club questions. We encourage you to formulate questions for our speaker now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here and those listening to 90.3 FM, WCPN Idea Stream, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partners are WVIZ, PBS Idea Stream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. Today's program is the first in a series presented in partnership with several community partners, the Alliance for Water Future, Green City Blue Lake, and our media partner, EcoWatch. Today's program is sponsored by the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. Join us next Tuesday, July 24th, as the City Club and Inside Business present the Next Business Leaders Series program sponsored by Huntington Bank, featuring Admiral Jonathan Greenert, Chief of Naval Operations, in conversation with Dr. David Cooperrider from Weatherhead School of Management. For more information about our upcoming forums, to make a reservation or to order a CD or DVD of one of our many programs, please refer to our website, www.cityclub.org. Today is the City Club of Cleveland's annual forum on the environment, made possible by a generous gift from Stanley and Hope Adelstein. Stanley and Hope are with us today at the head table. Will you please stand and be recognized? We welcome guests today at tables hosted by the Cleveland Council on World Affairs and Councilman Joe Simperman. Thank you for your support. Now we would like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphone today is City Club Program Director Carrie Miller and Development Associate Michael Grimaldi. First question, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to disagree with you about Rust Belt. To me, rust means iron and water, and it connotes to me a mature region with primary steel making capacity and all the other industries that go with that, and lots of fresh water. If President Obama can turn a term like Obamacare, which everybody looked at as negative, into a positive, why can't our region take the term Rust Belt and turn it into something positive?
Well, this may be the hardest political debate I've ever had, so I don't know. I'm okay. For me, it's like fingernails on a scratch board, for several reasons. One, I don't think people like rust, generally speaking. And again, I don't mean to denigrate in any way the incredible industries that are associated with machinery or manufacturing or rust, for that matter. But I really don't think it's who we are. I think the freshness just sends a much better message, and I think it is who we are. It's the reason that this part of the country was settled, and so again, I'm not going to sue you if you use it or anything like that. But it always has bugged me that I always thought that the two terms were thought up by someone in a PR firm in Atlanta or something like that. That well, let's take the sun, let's give them the rust, something like that. So.
Mayor, over here.
Yes.
Thank you for coming to our great city. My question concerns the carp invasion. We, communities along Lake Erie, are very concerned about that, concerned that Congress is not doing anything or the administration. Is there a like concern of the communities along Lake Michigan?
Well, you're talking about the Asian carp that has come up in many different ways, but the way we've studied it, and the cities have studied it, Dave Ulrich, who is our director, has also done a lot of work on this issue in conjunction with the Chicago issue, because what has happened is, my understanding is that in the southern part of the Mississippi, that there was Asian carp, and some of them were actually brought to the country because there's some people who like it, got into the river, started heading north, and its ability to basically take over a water system is what everyone is freaked out by, for lack of a better term. So it starts heading up the Illinois River toward Chicago, and you get to Chicago and the canal system in Chicago. And there's a discovery of Asian carp DNA in the water. So my understanding is we haven't seen it certainly in Lake Michigan, but it is close by. And it's moving up the Mississippi River as well. That's what led to the whole conversation of what do you do with the Chicago Canal. The reason this is so important is it was probably over 100 years ago where Chicago, the city of Chicago, which ironically is probably the largest community that is diverting water from the Great Lakes, because what they did, they were using the Chicago River, when they did their waste treatment, it was all going into Lake Michigan, a big problem. They decided that they would engineer an actual reversal of the river and send it to the southwest, ultimately towards the Mississippi River. Obviously, this did not benefit the people who live southwest of Chicago, from my perspective. But in any event, that's how that happened. The question now is, if you reverse the water, and you put in barriers so that the fish can't get there, will that keep them out? And it is a tremendously expensive undertaking. And I think what it's going to come down to ultimately, because you asked whether Congress would get involved, who's responsible for this? Who should bear the cost of this? Governor Quinn of Illinois has indicated that he is at least open to this idea, which was a major breakthrough to have the governor make that statement in the last month or so. But the real issue is going to be who bears the cost, because there are huge amounts of money that would have to be spent to engineer this, and there are related land use issues that come along with this as well. But I think that there is more attention being paid to it now. And the invasive species run both ways. There's well over 100 invasive species that have come into the Great Lakes, but the Asian carp is the one that, at least right now, appears to be the largest and most serious threat. So if I'm in Chicago and I want to deal with it, I'm going to be trying to get the state government and the federal government to help pay for it. I don't see where Cleveland or Milwaukee, for that matter, is going to want to step up to pay for this issue, because we haven't created it. The question is, how much support would there be in Congress to have at least some of this paid for by the federal government? And I think that probably gets to the crux of your issue. I think the leadership is going to have to come from Illinois first to say, we want to solve the problem, and this is how we want to solve the problem. I don't think that has happened definitively yet. Yeah.
You paint a lovely story of the enhancing the purity of the Great Lakes water and the freshness. I was wanting to just sort of link back to the first question, really, which is not just to call it a renaissance that you would like to see of the Great Lakes, but maybe an evolution, because we have this tremendous resource in the Great Lakes that we're not yet using, which is the offshore wind power. Steady and strong, renewable, free, and certainly clean. And although in every lake, except Lake Erie, you would actually have to have floating turbines, but that actually is a stimulus to further evolution of our manufacturing prowess. We would have it's only 60 foot at the deepest of Lake Erie, and so we could stick them in the ground. But the rest of the lakes would actually have to invent the floating. But that would be an extra stimulus to jobs, manufacturing, and clean future.
Well, I think it would be a wonderful addition, and I think Lake Erie could take the lead on it, quite honestly. And let me say this, when I talk about a renaissance or an evolution, I'm able to sort of talk about two of my twin loves here. One is the Great Lakes, the other is cities. And so let me blend them together again for a moment here. One of the things I say about cities, American cities, is the one constant of American cities is we are always changing. That's the constant. And we have always been the place where immigrants have wanted to come to start living the American dream. And what has happened in the 200 plus years of our country is that the immigrant groups have changed. And from English and Irish and Polish and Italian, and then you get to other regions of the globe, and Africa, and now Central America, South America, Russia. All these immigrants come and they want to start living the American dream. And that's, I think that's great. We are the places where people don't turn our backs on people. We are inclusionary just by the nature of who we are. But we are constantly evolving. And I think the shots that Cleveland has taken, that Milwaukee has taken, that Pittsburgh has taken, St. Louis, Detroit, are all shots that we're going to rebound from. And so I think the evolution or the renaissance is a way to look at it. And I do think that wind power is certainly among those assets, potential assets, that we can use. I will tell you this, we, in Milwaukee, with some of our recovery money, we put up a wind turbine at our port so that we could use the wind there to help provide the power to the port. And we did so because we thought it made sense economically, but we also wanted to send a message as a city that we were open to alternative sustainable energy sources. And so it has to be economically feasible, it has to be economically sustainable, and because of the shallowness of Lake Erie, it may be the perfect place to start doing that. Now the question is, how do you get the investors, how do you get the utilities, how do you get others to try to do that? But if you can do that, I think you could be a real trendsetter.
Mr. Mayor, the use of water in drilling for natural gas is substantial. Two questions, if I may, because this is a problem certainly in Ohio and our neighbor in Pennsylvania, where we're blessed with the Utica Shale and that sort of thing that actually produces the gas from which that is produced through the fracking process. How much water is being removed from the Great Lakes to supply water for the drilling process? And why is the oil and gas industry not put under the same restrictions that, whether it's steel, paint, or anything, any other industrial process that uses water is under, to clean up the water rather than injecting it back in the earth and not back into the lake?
That's a very good question. And let me tell you that I'm still very much in the learning stage when it comes to fracking. It was 3 or 4 years ago, I was at the annual conference of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Mayor's Initiative, where I first heard the term fracking. And so it's obviously a relatively, at least from my perspective, a relatively new technology that's been used to capture this resource. And I think around the country, what you're seeing, I know in New York right now, for example, there's been some criticism of Governor Cuomo because he has tried to straddle the fence as to what his position is on it. I think policymakers are still trying to get our arms around it. Just to give you my very candid assessment, there are environmental concerns. There is clearly a huge economic boom for those who are able to produce energy using fracking. But I think that this is a situation where industry is actually ahead of policymakers right now on environmental concerns, on remediation concerns, on economic impacts. But you look at states like North Dakota, which are doing incredibly well because of their ability to take advantage of this. And I don't know the answer as to how much of the Great Lakes water is to be used, but I will certainly do some work to find that out. I think it's an excellent, excellent question.
Hi, I'm Elaine Barnes with Earth Day Coalition. Thank you for coming and joining us, Mayor. I've followed a lot of the work that the Ohio Consumers Council has done with regard to water and water ownership, and in the state of Ohio, a lot of our water has been privatized and is now owned by what was American Water and is now Aqua America. And can you speak at all to the impacts of that and the potential availability of water from the Great Lakes? Because that's been a concern, I know, of the Consumers Council for several years now.
Well, I think the ownership and the access to water, whether it's access for boating, the ownership is a more serious issue. The water distribution and the ownership of water distribution is a lively issue. And I can tell you, again, in our community, our comptroller, who was a separately elected official, several years ago talked about privatizing our water utility. And it was met with fierce opposition, unlike opposition that we've seen for other privatization efforts. Not surprisingly, whenever there's a public good or service that there is going to be a talk about privatization, there are going to be those who absolutely love it and those who absolutely hate it. I found the discussion of water privatization to be even more emotion evoking, I think, because it gets to the basics of life. And so I think that is an issue, at least in Wisconsin, where we haven't, once that was raised, we haven't seen it being raised again. I think anytime you're talking about privatization of an asset this incredibly important, that the public at large is very wary of that. And so I don't know what the specifics are of what's going on here, but I would be surprised if ordinary people don't rise up in arms, hopefully not in arms, rise up against that.
When I go to the city of Chicago and drive up Lakeshore Drive and see those wonderful beaches that are inhabited by hundreds, if not thousands of people in the summertime, it's always a disappointment that this is not in Cleveland. I don't know if Milwaukee has that same availability, but do you have any suggestions as to what we in Cleveland can do to have that wonderful accessibility?
Well, there are several things, and we had problems with our beaches in Milwaukee, and we still do. This week, in fact, one of our 3 beaches is closed because of some E. coli. bacteria that's there. And here it is the hottest week of the year, and we have to close one of the beaches. But we did have problems a decade ago where the very, very popular beaches were not being used. And it was our water MMSD, Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District, your counterpart is here today, who came to me and said, we want to start working to clean the beaches. And it was sort of a test for me, because the beaches are not under the city's jurisdiction, they're under the county's jurisdiction. And the county at the time did not want to put resources into cleaning up the beaches. And so I'm the guy that gets blamed a lot of times for the taxes for the sewage district. And so I had this moment of truth where, okay, what am I going to do? Are we going to let these beaches remain unused, or am I going to take potentially the hit for starting to clean them up? And he sort of guilted me into doing the right thing, and saying, look, we got to clean up the beaches. And so they took their equipment and started cleaning up the beaches. The county then came around, and now the beaches are used a lot. So the beaches are doing great there. What I don't know enough about is whether your problems here are because of the issues in Lake Erie itself, or whether they're shoreline issues. Maybe someone else here knows the answer to that. But I certainly think the potential is there to clean them up, but it's going to take the political will to do it. And that's why, again, I'm going to give another shameless plea to try to get policymakers from Northern Ohio involved in this initiative. I think if the policymakers here, and I don't know what they have done or what they haven't done, but if you can get the cities, the counties, the port, the state legislators to do it, it can be done. And I think we have an obligation to make sure that it is done. So to me, that's one of the challenges that you face as a community group. How do you make it happen? And if anybody knows how to do it, Cleveland should know how to do it. When you think of what happened back in the 1969 with the Cuyahoga, and just the challenges that became the poster boy for a while with that, but it led to a lot of really good things. So I think let's do it again. Yeah.
Mayor Barrett, you spoke about the challenges of facing the Great Lakes. We sometimes think of the Great Lakes as being owned by the United States and by Ohio and New York and Pennsylvania, other states which border the Great Lakes. Of course, the fact of the matter is that Canada has an equal right to the Great Lakes because the provinces also border the Great Lakes. There's an imaginary line somewhere in the middle, which is Canadian water, which is American water. But to what extent do you feel that the Canadian governments, particularly in Ontario and other provinces that border the Great Lakes, are as aware of the potential problems and are willing to do as much about it as we here in the United States?
I think the Canadian communities that I have been in contact with are as good, if not better, than American communities in dealing with the issue. And again, the organization that I'm part of, there are 106 cities that are part of the organization right now. Roughly 2/3 of those cities are Canadian cities. 1/3 of them are American cities. The American cities are by and large larger, but a lot of the small communities on the northern part of the lakes have been part of this organization. So they very much are in tune with what we're trying to do. One of the hottest issues we have right now, for example, deals with a low waste, nuclear waste depository that's about less than a mile, I think, from I think it's Lake Huron. And our last meeting, we had a hot conversation about whether the low-level waste should be stored that close to the Great Lakes. The power is generated there, so the nuclear waste was created there. The question is, do we have it be the permanent depository there? And they're split. They're split because the communities that are right there, where the jobs are created, they're more likely to be in favor of it than those that are not benefiting from it economically. But I have been very, very impressed by their commitment to improving the Great Lakes. And they have the same budgetary, not exactly the same, but they have similar budgetary issues at the provincial level and at the national level. So back to the question of the Chicago River, for example, it always becomes a question of resources as well. But that was one of the things that surprised me and impressed me most of this organization, was just how engaged they are from both sides of the border. Yes, sir. Oh, back there, I'm sorry. I'm breaking the rule.
I grew up in Cleveland, and as a kid, we went to the Baldwin Water Works and so forth to see how water is created here. I had 14 years in Chicago, and when they wanted to build the western suburbs, they ran a great big arterial pump line right out the Congress Street Expressway, over 50 miles. My question for Waukesha, is it better for you to expand the Milwaukee Water and Goat Water Works and serve them with pure water than to try to reduplicate?
Well, that's a very good question, and you're getting into the nuances of southeastern Wisconsin politics here, which is okay. And again, this might be similar. Keep in mind that Milwaukee, at one point, was the brewing capital of the United States. Foundries use a lot of water. So our water utility right now, which is owned by the city, is running at about a third of its capacity. So we have water to sell. And if my water utility director were here, she would say, sell the water. So, I mean, that's her job. Just sell the water, sell the water, sell the water to anybody who will want to buy it. The policymakers obviously are concerned about many other issues as well. And what happened, so let me be clear. If anybody's selling water to Waukesha, my first choice was to have it be the city of Milwaukee because we have this excess capacity. I can make money selling them water. That doesn't get to the return issue. But I looked at the Great Lakes Compact and I read it, and I'm either right or I'm wrong because they showed me the map of the area they wanted to serve, and it was much larger than the area that I envisioned. In other words, I envisioned it just to be the city of Waukesha, where I will take them at their word that they have a radium problem and they need the water. The service area was much larger than that. And I said, I don't think this is going to get past the other Great Lakes governors because the way the compact works, it has to be approved at the local level. Then it goes to a technical review level of the 2 provinces and the 8 states. Then the 8 states, not the 2 provinces, but the 8 states, the governors all have to approve the diversion. And I said, I think you're asking for trouble here by having it large. This is the first diversion outside the Great Lakes region. I would be crossing every T and dotting every I to make sure you're going to get it right because people are going to be looking at this one. They took a different path. They went to a separate utility at one of our suburban water utilities who said, we will service the whole area. And so they're the ones that now are the ones that will benefit from it. But the return flow issue still has not been resolved, how you return it to the lake, which I think is going to be a big issue as well. But again, from a purely selfish standpoint, it would make sense for me to sell them the water. But I do think that this has to be viewed within the entire region as well and what's right in the law, quite honestly.
Mayor?
Yeah.
Water commerce is probably one of the most efficient ways to move things, yet the reason perhaps that you're sometimes down 30 inches and we in Lake Erie get some more water is the improvements that have been made along the way to deepen drafts. At the same time, for all the salties bring us, they've also brought us some invasive species. What work, if any, are the Great Lakes mayors and cities doing to perhaps change the way that we ship in the Great Lakes and do some transfer or short sea shipping in the sense that we're never going to take the new Panamax ships in. We're going to have transfers for containers and other things, and a lot of the export as well as import opportunities we have are to Europe and other places in the world that we need access to that. Are you working that issue at all?
We are, and the port director might be in a better position to address that at some point. But clearly, I think the dredging issues have caused some issues. The invasive species problems that come from the salties, as you describe it, are things that we are concerned about. But I would love to see more commerce. I would love to see our port, your port, all the ports along the Great Lakes be more active. And I think it's a question of what's the most efficient way once you hit shore to have that shipped from there. They really become intermodal transportation networks as much as anything. And how effective it is, whether it's rail or truck primarily, to move it once it hits the shore. I think that's part of the issue that we face. But I also agree with you that the Panama Canal and the work they're doing there may have an impact on this. But I do believe there are still opportunities. And again, I like to see the ports become more active.
Mr. Mayor, behind you. A couple questions. One is, what is your recommendation to us as to how we can best influence the policymakers regarding the policies about the lakes, and is Mayor Jackson part of your initiative?
Mayor Jackson is not part of the initiative, and I don't say that, I respect mayors. Mayors have decisions to make, and so there are organizations that I'm not part of that people criticize me for not being part of, and so I'm never going to criticize anybody for something that they're part of or not part of. What I do believe, though, is that what happens with mayors is we have a lot on our plate, and if you have issues of poverty or crime, which I have both, if you have issues of education, housing, and those are all issues, you have to set priorities. I believe that we have benefited so much from these Great Lakes, and that the potential is so limitless for us in the future that I have just personally chosen to make this one of my priorities. And that's, again, I think that's something everybody makes. I also, though, am a firm believer in positive momentum and negative momentum. And we have seen this organization grow. It started out 10 years ago when David Miller, who was then the mayor of Toronto, and Mayor Daley of Chicago got together. And it has grown to, again, we're up to 106 cities. When I came in, it was 93 cities. So I think we're on a positive momentum roll. And I think just to give positive reinforcement to all mayors along here, I think would be very, very important. And it's a good organization. And I really do think that Lake Erie could benefit from it. And I think if Lake Erie benefits from it, Cleveland benefits from it, all the communities along the lake benefit from it. Good. You give me the hook. Okay, thank you.
Today at the City Club, we have been listening to a Friday Forum featuring the Honorable Tom Barrett, Mayor of Milwaukee. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This program is now adjourned.